Hello, everybody. I'm Bianna Golodryga from Yahoo News, and those indeed are some depressing facts. But the news is not all bad. In fact, juvenile incarceration has fallen dramatically over the past few years, and as you all know, this has been a huge week for juvenile justice. Just days ago, President Obama banned solitary confinement for juveniles in federal prisons, and the Supreme Court ruled to enforce its ban on mandatory life sentences for juveniles. However, 14 states still have no minimum age to try children as adults. And as we speak, approximately 10,000 children sit in America's adults' prisons. So for many young people, the path to prison begins at school. Or more accurately, it begins with being ejected from school. Suspension or expulsion vastly increases a person's likelihood of ending up in prison later in life. And in America, Black and Latino youth are expelled 3 times as often as white students, and they make up 70% of in-school arrests. The panel beside me here is to talk about how this is happening and how they are working to course and correct the situation. Actor and playwright Anna Deavere Smith, her latest play, Notes from the Field, doing time in education, is a brilliant bird's eye view of our failing education and justice system. In it, she brings issues to life with testimony from judges, teachers, doctors, parents, students, and activists, and of course, many more. To her left is Judge Jimmie Edwards. He's a circuit court judge from St. Louis. He founded the Innovation Concept Academy, a remarkable school for at-risk youth. The school is a lifeline for hundreds of young people who would otherwise be denied an education. And to his right is Adam Foss. He's an assistant district attorney from Suffolk County in Boston. He is trained to become a defense attorney in law school, but quickly decided that he would be more positive of a force as a prosecutor, and we'll get into that decision later on. And last but not least, Joanne Jaffe is the chief of the Community Affairs Bureau for NYPD. Under her purview are the Juvenile Justice and School Safety Divisions for New York City Police Department. So thank you all for joining us in this very interesting topic and what will be an interesting conversation. So even though the juvenile incarceration is falling, we're still seeing the need for more improvement. Adam, I want to start with you and get more context as to how we got here. The spike in juvenile incarceration in the 1980s really is where we are right now and what we're trying to deal with as far as numbers. How did we get here?
As you saw in the video, there was a phenomenon that sort of was generated in the media and circulated throughout the public that in the late 80s, early 90s, and into the new millennium, there would be this thing called the super predator, which were the kids of parents who had been incarcerated, parents who had been disenfranchised, and this whole section of kids was going to terrorize the United States of America. So that, in combination with Columbine school shooting and other such events, there was a confluence of those events that created policies which really started in the schools with zero tolerance, which got us to where we are today.
And Anna, in doing research for your play, Doing Time in Education, you had the opportunity to speak to parents, to students, and the prison as well. Can you describe what the school-to-prison pipeline is?
Sure. So I've done about 200 interviews now, and I can see people in the audience who I know and know what I do, which is that I interview people, and then I make plays where I strive to embody the problem and represent it from multiple points of view. And in doing this project, I've interviewed now about 200 people. And I actually think that I would like to not call it the school-to-prison pipeline. I think that's unfair to schools, it's unfair to teachers, and sort of the best advice I got when I started was the then dean of the School of Education, Graduate School of Education at Stanford, Claude Steele, who said this is really a problem of poverty. And so in that context, I'll say that I have lots of good news, that I have met a lot of wounded healers, and I would say that the spans of people doing things that I've met range from the chief judge of the Yurok tribe in Northern California, who believes that culture, and going back to original cultural forms like dances, can make a difference, to world world-famous neuroendocrinologist, Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University, who's doing work on brain plasticity. A lot of people doing work on trauma, the effect of stress and poverty on development of cognitive development, but we're also meeting people who are using science to figure out how to make early interventions. So there's a lot of good news out there.
And we're going to get to some of that good news in a bit more detail later on in this discussion. But Judge Edwards, you've been a judge in juvenile court for many years. Can you explain what effect suspension does have on a juvenile?
Well, firstly, a humanitarian problem. The thoroughly refuted zero-tolerance laws in America have always made 0 sense. Suspensions and expulsions with respect to children will inevitably cause them to be imprisoned. Unfortunately, we oftentimes look at third grade reading levels, second grade reading levels, but it's the suspensions and the expulsions of inmates that appear to be the most glaring problem. In Missouri, we've tried to change that. I know that there's no measurable difference between the students, the African American and brown students, and very poor white students in my community, and myself. So we set out to try to address that problem to keep kids in school. Education is the key. Certainly, it is the key to a good paycheck. We all want that.
Right.
But with education comes the ability for our children to have success. So in my mind, it is indeed the most important thing to do. And so it raises and begs a lot of questions as to how do we keep children in school? Well, we have to do those things that are necessary to address that double problem that children have. Our children are living a double life. They live in an environment and a home life where they get themselves in trouble, no mom, no dad, chaos. And then at school, we expect for them to be good citizens. So how do we address that?
And you've talked to a lot of these children. In fact, 5 of your students have been murdered over the past few years. What is life like for these children? Can you give us some more specific examples and stories that you hear from day on end?
Our children want to succeed, and certainly they have the capacity to do that. But it's very, very difficult. They're at home, they're trying to live in an environment that requires them to be a certain type of person. You have to be a gang member, you have to be tough. Just last final semester, the final exam period, I had a child, William, who was one of those kids, lives in a tough neighborhood. William arrived at school to take his test because that's what Judge Edwards wants. You have to be there. You have to be educated. But William arrived at school with a loaded 9mm. He took it out of his pocket and he gave it to the security officer. And he said, "Would you please keep this gun for me until I finish my test?" William was arrested. You can't bring guns to school. But that tells me something. That tells me that he wants to be there. But he has to live that life outside on the street. Bright, articulate, didn't want to get himself in trouble. He brings a gun.
And Chief Jaffe, so many people point to the so-called broken windows policing as leading to the increase in incarceration of youth. Is that true? And can you explain what broken windows policing is?
In general, broken windows is dealing with the small things so they don't manifest themselves into bigger things. You know, if you go back into the 1980s and early 1990s in New York City, we saw what we called wilding incidents in the city. It was plastered across every newspaper, every front page, 25 kids running through Times Square, beating up people, robbing people, and it put a lot of fear into the citizens in New York City, and government officials reacted to it. In the early 80s, we saw the crack epidemic in this city, and we saw a lot of people's behavior turn more violent. So there was a lot of fear, a lot of perception of victimization, and then police departments, city agencies decided to be tougher on crime going into the 1990s and being more assertive and aggressive in dealing with people that are involved in some type of not only illegal behavior, but behavior that could be interpreted as like harassment or disorderly conduct.
And do you see those arrests making the streets of New York City any safer?
Back then, I think they contributed to making them safer. Of course, when you work really hard and get people that are robbing people off the street and they go to jail and they stay in jail, in some ways that temporarily helps. It's like a Band-Aid. It's a short-term solution, but it's clearly not a long-term solution. As we heard earlier, 95% of people that go to jail get out of jail, and we as society have a responsibility to deal with that. We have to think of these problems as long-term, not short-term.
And these juveniles, Adam, are entitled to defense as well, and you've defended many of them, though at some point in your life you thought you'd be more effective as being a prosecutor. That, to many, would sound counterintuitive. Can you explain why you made that decision and what you've seen as far as change along the lines?
As I started out sort of in law school and going through law school, I felt, I'm sure the same way a lot of people in this room do, that there was a problem in the criminal justice system, and a lot of it ended up having people going to jail that shouldn't be there, young people being in jail that shouldn't be there. And so I thought the best way to combat that would be a defender. What I realized through that experience is that as a defender, you're sort of powerless. You're asking all the time. You're asking the judge for something. You're asking the prosecutor for something. You're asking the probation officer for something. What I came to realize was that the prosecutor had all the power. It was the house if you were gambling. And I wanted that. And so to shift from trying to keep people out of jail as a defender, I'm trying to help kids stay out of jail, because our kids are no different than the young people that are here at John Jay. It's just the impediments to their success are so great that they need advocates on both sides to help them navigate that period of time.
And Anna, I want to get back to your research and the people that you've spoken with. As you mentioned, you spoke with a neurologist, and one of the characters in your play is a neurologist. And I think a lot of people don't spend enough time talking about the impact of trauma and what these children see day in and day out, what impact that has on their lives and their young brains as they are developing. Can you give us more insight into that? And also the attention that white young children receive compared to those of Latinos and African Americans?
Well, I would say that, first of all, I just want to pick up on something you said, Adam, which makes me think of a young man that I met in a facility outside of Washington who was talking about all the services that he gets when he's locked up. He's now 18, and he'd like to stay inside till he's 21, because when he goes back on the street, he won't have a mentor, he won't have a tutor, he won't have possibility of a job. And his only fear is that if he decides to stay in or do something else to come back in, they could send him anywhere they want, anywhere in the country that they want. But he's actually thinking about doing something where he can be assured of services. Otherwise, as he says, I'll be back on the streets robbing people, stealing cars, selling drugs. Doesn't really want to do that, right? So this idea of what happens before and after is so important. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of discussion now of trauma. I was invited to be in a fireside chat at the White House with Valerie Jarrett on school discipline this summer, and I was surprised at how many people are taking this notion of school discipline and talking about trauma. So one of the people I perform is a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist, and what they know is that, in fact, trauma is passed down generation to generation through DNA. And the good news is that people are paying attention to this now, and that there are ways to increase what's called brain plasticity. And actually, the research on that can help poor kids, but can help all of us who are over a certain age, right? So that there's actually benefits from looking at that which we would like to discard in terms of the overall well-being of everyone. And so I think that this work that I'm coming across is really about how to improve not just test scores, but mental and physical health of children, and all the money that we're spending on the back end, which this day deals with a lot. How about if we put that on the front end and really make schools places that can, build lives and save lives?
And that mental, that's right. And that mental stimulation that you say children need and they crave, as we all know, and as experts suggest as well, applies to what you're doing, Judge Edward. Your program runs from 8 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. every day. It's so hard to keep these children occupied and preoccupied when they're not in school. Why is it so important to stay in school, and why have you extended it to even longer hours than most schools across the country? Tell me what you're doing in those schools.
Well, certainly in my mind, there are three pathways to being imprisoned. The first pathway is a lack of adult supervision. Secondly, too much idle time. And thirdly, economic constraints. And I can tell you that if any two of those exist in a child's life in any combination, that child will inevitably end up in prison. And so my job at Innovative Concept Academy is to try to eradicate at least two of those in any combination. So if I can provide the appropriate mental health services in school, the drug interdiction and treatment in school, if I can provide anger management in school, and if I can provide the appropriate tutorial, serious, compassionate folk to give our kids hope, give them an opportunity to understand what's expected of them and a realistic opportunity of getting there, then our kids will have the ability to succeed. And I'm happy to report that the judiciary, the court system, is starting to understand that. We're starting to understand that at the National State Courts Center. We're understanding that all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts, gave me an award, and he talked about black children and brown children and having an opportunity in education. But all of that came about because of People magazine, who decided to write a story on me, and all of a sudden, there was traction all over this country, and the judges are starting to say, we have to address this implicit bias issue. We have to address all of these other issues that have impacted negatively black and brown children. And I'm pretty happy about that because there have been a lot of negative things coming out of Missouri in the last year and a half or so. And I'm very, very happy to say that we're going to take the lead on this whole issue with trying to stem and or eradicate zero tolerance in education for children.
Good for you, Judge.
Judge, how can we not have you make a shout out for art? If what I read about you is right, you've got drama classes going.
I do.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, they've taken art out of the schools, so you need to campaign to bring it back.
One of the first places they cut funding,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Chief Jaffe, I think we all know that it's in society's interest to keep children in school and out of prisons. What is the NYPD doing to reduce the number of summons and school arrests? I know that you're starting to issue more warnings.
Right. So in the past couple of years, under the mayor's leadership, there was formed under the Criminal Justice Coordinator a mayor's leadership task force to look at school-related issues. It involves the NYPD, the Department of Education, many other city agencies, and advocate groups. And we've changed philosophy of how we deal and address with, and so has principals in schools. And this is going on as we speak through our training, through our hiring practices, related to arresting, suspending students is up to the Department of Education. But for us, issuing summonses in school and arresting students. So over the past 4 years, our arrests and summonses of students are down like 70%, 65 to 70%. At the same time, 7 major crimes in schools in the city, 1.1 million students is down about 25%. We just embarked on a warning card program in 38 schools in the Bronx. They're in 5 separate buildings, but many schools under Department of Education have been combined. And we're doing a warning card program for students 16 years of age and older who would normally receive, say, a criminal court summons for possession of marijuana and/or disorderly conduct, and we're giving them a warning card, which is a piece of paper. A copy goes to the adult, the parent in their life, and also the Department of Education, and it's Department of Education's responsibility to then address the behavior. So in effect, they're not getting a criminal court summons, which if they don't appear, they then would be issued a warrant. Then when they have a warrant, if they're ever stopped again, they're getting arrested. So it hopefully thwarts the beginning of that cycle that could then perpetuate itself and make it worse after, worse and worse.
And that long process that you just described. But as the judge mentioned, I think people fail to think about the impact of many of these kids having double lives at home, at school, and what they see in both places. There's only so much that teachers and judges and folks like yourself can do to help these children and protect them. Some do fall through the cracks and pick up guns as well. Chief Jaffe, you've been working on powerful education to prevent this from happening. Before you tell us more about it, we have a short video we want to show you.
There is nothing you can do to make it right. And it's that fast, and it's over, and it's done, and you don't even know what you did. And by the time you understand, it is too late.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I wish you could see that whole 6-minute video. I'll tell you that it's a TED Talk. But my experience in the housing developments, just to put this in context, I was the housing chief for 10 years, so we're talking 600,000 people, 334 developments in the city, one development, 50 buildings, 20 buildings. You're dealing with lower income, issues, all societal ills, by and large, that are affecting people in different ways in public housing. And then you have your cluster areas of public housing like East Harlem, Brownsville, and the South Bronx, where there's a tremendous amount of public housing in a very concentrated area. So, the issues that we saw, obviously, are gangs and crews, and the pull to get young people involved in the gangs and crews. And some of the young kids, a lot of them feel like they don't have a choice. They're doing it at survival. It's like the judge just said. We see, the disease that permeates these places, and not all of them, of course, is hopelessness and despair. And we have to work to take that hopelessness and despair and turn it into hope and dreams. And we have to affect these young children's lives. And we have to do it in different ways. We have to do it through the educational system. We have to do it through law enforcement. We have to do it through all the social service agencies and my partners in city government. So we do a lot in the New York City Police Department under the Community Affairs Bureau to address and to work to build relationships with young people. We have our summer camp, a youth police academy, thousands of kids for free, 6 weeks over the summer. We have the Explore program, 3,500 kids are involved with us. There are posts throughout schools and every precinct in PSA and transit district. But we also got involved with a gentleman named Dan Slepian who went to the mayor's office, and he was working with convicted murderers in Sing Sing, and that's what you just saw, a snippet of the video that he made. And convicted murderers in Sing Sing, there was altogether about 15 of them, and I had the opportunity to meet with them last year up at Sing Sing. They, after years and years in prison, they wanted to do something to give back. And they came together and went to their superintendent, Mike Capra of Sing Sing Prison, and said, we want to do something. And they created an art, music, and drama program in Sing Sing with these guys and a lot of other people. They're doing poetry. But they did a video, and the video was with Dan Slepian, who produced the 6-minute video, and there's a 4-minute TED Talk. And it's the Voices Within project. And these guys sat in a room with a video recorder by themselves and talked to young people about the consequences of picking up a gun, the consequences of violence and your actions, which we know young people, their brains are not fully developed, so they don't think through consequences and impulsivity. And these guys talked to them, they talked about themselves, and they talked to their victims and how they know they ruin people's lives. And so we in the police department got wind of this, and we started working with that video. And then we, the police department, did a second video. And we went out and we found young men, they're not so young anymore, say they're in their 30s, but who were also involved in criminal and gang activity. And they were all shot, and they're either quadriplegics or paraplegics. And we did a video, and that video is also on YouTube, so you could see it. And we spoke to them, and we asked those 3 guys who were willing to participate in this program with us, the police department, if they would talk to young people, and what would they say. And throughout the whole thing, it's stay in school. Don't let the streets eat you up. Fast money ain't good money. And those are just quotes. But it's all about the educational system and listen to the adults in your life. So we took these 2 videos and we started training people in the New York City Police Department on how to facilitate discussions with young people in all the different communities. So it could be a school setting. If we had the opportunity to bring only 15 kids together, Department of Probation is using it also. It could be in a school setting, it could be at meetings, it could be at a PTA meeting, but small groups, 2 hours, and use the video, not that it's gonna be the panacea, it's not gonna solve everybody, but to have these kids start talking and opening up.
It's a start. Well, it's great to hear that the NYPD is looking at innovative ways of changing the system and taking guns away from children's hands. So I want to thank this panel. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been very interesting. Thank you.